Hello everyone, welcome to my ultimate guide to framing and matting art for your home. This video is a comprehensive A to Z guide of just about everything that you would need to know in order to do custom framing and matting for art in your home. Of course, it is absolutely worth it to get this done professionally. As you'll see, it can be a lot of work and there's a lot of precision involved. However, I think it's so worth it to know how to do this on your own and to invest in some tools that will last you years so you can constantly update the art in your home and just give it that new personality that it might be needing. This video is quite substantial, so I've created a bunch of chapters and I've split the video into two sections, framing and matting. We're covering framing first, where I have 10 different framing examples, and then we're jumping into matting, where I have 10 specific examples on different ways to mat your art. And I'm covering everything from the boring stuff of how to add wire to the back of your frame to the really fun stuff that's transformational, like taking a busted frame and a really cool piece of art and matting it in a really interesting way so that it looks really chic in my home. But honestly, everything you need to know to get started to make really interesting looking art for your home is in this video. I'm also including literally every tool that I use to frame and mat art at my own home, and I am listing them in the description below just in case they might help you get started. So let's jump into it and get started on some simple framing hacks. All of you who love those vintage or antique frames from the flea market or estate sales or thrift stores have probably encountered one like this one from the 20s that are so beautiful and ornate and different, but they're commonly very dirty and banged up and have this like linen interior kind of acting as a matting that gets really stained and dirty. And although that can add to the patina, I'm going to show you how you can clean up an antique frame without ruining it. So we're just going to use some Dawn dish soap and spray it lightly on the linen. For some reason, this power wash version of Dawn soap is so much better than the others. It just really easily eats up all that dirt and grime that's built up over the years. And then I'm using a really light setting on my hose outside and just doing a light spray to get out any dirt. And I'm gonna do this, a few times, but I don't want to overdo it because I don't want to risk ripping the old linen as it is very frail. So my big tip here is to not use excessive force. Even if the stain isn't coming out, just keep doing a few rounds, letting it dry in between. So once you're done cleaning the frame and the linen, make sure you wipe down the frame itself with a towel to dry it off so the wood doesn't warp. And then once it's all done drying in the sun, bring it inside and add a layer of Howard's Feed and Wax to just preserve the integrity of the wood and just bring it back to life. And now to compare what the frame used to look like and what it looks like now, I think it's a huge improvement, and it still definitely has its flaws, but that's part of what we love about antique frames, right? And when we get to the matting portion of this video, I'm going to show you how I add this really antique oil painting into this frame. So let's move on. So we've got another vintage frame here. This one has more linen on it than the first one, but the other issue here is the back hanger is broken and I've just never gotten around to replacing it. Plus the frame is quite dirty, and I'm going to show you a different method of how to clean some of this linen on here. So we're going to start with the Dawn Power Wash like we did on the last one and just do a few rounds of this to get out the majority of the dirt and dust and grime that's been in there for decades. I'm also going to use some of this Miss Mouth's stain treater. It's amazing for stains on your clothes. Literally any stain it'll get out, and so it really does help lighten some water stains on the frames. And then I'm using a microfiber towel to just go back ever so lightly to just activate the stain treatment. I'm barely adding any pressure at all. Once I've rinsed that out, I'm going to use this distilled white vinegar and do like a 50-50 mix of vinegar and water in this spray bottle. And then I'm going to spray the linen all around the frame while it's laying in the sun to dry. Any excess solution that gets onto the frame, I'm going to wipe off with a microfiber towel so it doesn't sit there and ruin the wood. The vinegar and the sun really do help lighten the linen, which is going to help lift some of those old stains. And now I just need to replace the hanger on the back. This is fairly simple. You just need to untwist the old wire from the little eye hook that's screwed into the frame. And then I really like this vinyl coated wire because it doesn't hurt your hands and it holds up to 43 pounds, which is amazing for something this big. And so I just put this wire on the same exact way that the original wire was on. You make a little tight knot around the eye hook and then twist the excess around the wire, which just reinforces it and gives it some extra security. And then I like to pull the wire over to the other side before I cut it to size. And I just use my finger in the middle to make sure that the wire is going to be pretty taut. And then I leave like an extra 2 to 3 inches and cut it with some wire cutters and do the same exact process on the other side. And you shouldn't have too much slack here. You really do want it to be pretty stiff. The other reason I really like this wire is because if you can't tell, it's super springy. The whole spool wants to undo. So this thing has like a little hole in it that that you can put the wire through to just keep it in place so the whole spool doesn't come undone every time you use it. And again, this isn't a perfect transformation. However, it's such a huge improvement. You can see here in the before that the linen was just more dull and very dirty, and after it's a little bit brighter and there's still some minor water staining, but it's just so much better. And now that it has a hanger, I can actually use it. As you can see, putting in a little bit of effort can have a really big impact, especially with something that has so much potential. I've always been searching for and focusing on the small things that can lead to a really big impact with myself. And lately I've been adding in Ritual's Hyacera Daily Skin Hydration Supplement to my daily routine. So thank you so much to Ritual for sponsoring this video. And if you're into skincare like I am, you absolutely have to know about this because I truly am genuinely obsessed with it. Hyacera is a once daily skin supplement that enhances skin from within with clinically proven results for wrinkle reduction and skin smoothness. Lately, our Southern California weather has had like two speeds. It's been either really hot and dry or super cold and windy. So my skin has been really loving the extra support from Hyacera. It's feeling super smooth and hydrated. And even some of you have noted in the comments that my skin has been looking extra glowy, which thank you. I totally agree. I really think this was the missing ingredient to my skincare routine. Hyacera is ingestible, so you just take one capsule daily with or without food. I really like taking mine in the morning with my morning coffee or matcha, but you could also take it at night while you're doing your evening skincare routine. It's actually vanilla essence, so it tastes and smells really good, and Ritual is subscription based, so you don't ever have to worry about running out of this. There's a lot of exaggerated promises out there when it comes to skincare, but that's why I love that Ritual invested in a gold standard clinical study, so you can just have the facts. So if you're thinking that you might want to try Hyacera for your skin or any other Ritual supplements, I have a discount code for you. It's Living with LK25, where you can get 25% off your first order. To make it easy, you can scan the QR code on the screen, or you can click the link in my description below to order. Okay, let's get back into my framing hacks. So I'm going to mat this frame later in the video with a piece of my own art, but I did the same cleaning technique on the linen on this one and it turned out really good. And I just wanted to show you an example of what to do with a frame like this that doesn't have any type of hanger on it at all. I just ordered this pack of D-rings that has a variety of sizes. And because the frame is made out of wood, I can just easily screw them in. And then I'm going to use the same vinyl wire again on this one, but I could easily just leave it without the wire as well. You can still hang things on these D-rings. I find it hard to catch them on the nail or screw because they're kind of hard to see. So I always like adding a wire. It's just so much easier. When you are hanging a smaller frame with a wire, you just want to make sure that the wire is not going to go past the top of the frame and it's at least 1 to 2 inches below the top of it. But that's it. And this one is ready for some art. So I previously showed you how I used a greeting card as art in my home, but then I dropped the frame afterward and actually broke the glass. So I wanted to take this as an opportunity to show you how to change these types of frames, as they're very common at thrift stores. They're usually very affordable and they usually come in a lot of interesting colors or styles. Like this one has a blue border in the glass. This type of frame is commonly referred to as a snap-in frame. The frame's edges appear to bend into place around the artwork, and then the adhesive strips that are connected to the pieces of the frame help secure it to the backing board, making it single use because once you pull these off, the adhesive is damaged. So I'm going to show you how to easily repurpose it. And as a bonus tip, if you do have a situation like mine where you break the glass, you can just go to the thrift store and buy another frame that's the same exact size for maybe $2.99 and use that glass and put it in this frame. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. And then I swear by this glass cleaner because it literally leaves absolutely no residue as long as you use a microfiber towel, and it makes it look so good. And then I'm using the little piece of artwork that originally came in this frame from the thrift store and just flipping it over as the backing and putting the little card in the middle and then sliding these little frame edges on. But I'm using a masking tape to go over the edges of the frame and holding it in place so that it looks seamless. And as long as the tape overlaps on each corner that was disassembled, it's going to be held securely in place. So if you have a frame in your house and you already love the frame and the matting and the art, but then you accidentally dropped it or it fell off the wall and it's just hard to put back together because it's made out of some random MDF material, or even if it's made out of wood, you can put these back together quite easily with just something called a V-nail. And V-nails are used commonly in framing to attach all 4 sides of the frame together seamlessly. You're going to want to take out the existing V-nail inside there that was actually holding it together, and then we're going to add a new one in there. So we're going to use this adjustable adjustable band clamp that has 4 corners on it, and this is great for so many different projects, but especially framing. It provides just enough tension to keep the frame square. So as long as you align all 4 plastic corners on the frame and then use a little handle to tighten it, it'll act as a separate set of hands to keep everything in place while you work on it. So as you can see, I just placed the V-nail above where it used to be, just a little bit higher, and I'm just using a little hammer to slowly hammer it in. There was a mild gap between the 2 pieces of wood that broke, so I'm using one of these fill sticks instead of wood filler or spackle. These little fill sticks are made out of a wax and resin, so they don't need any time to dry. So once you buff out the excess, it's ready to be painted or stained. And this is just so much easier and faster and less messy than using wood filler or spackle, especially for very small imperfections like this. So once I was finished filling in all the gaps, I just gave it a coat of paint. I chose this like lighter yellow that would just give me a different change of pace with this piece of art. And then I let it dry and also coated it with a clear Rust-Oleum finish just to add a protective sealant on top, and I was done. So for those of you who maybe have some frames around the house and they're just not your style anymore, you could absolutely just add a fresh coat of spray paint to them. But let me show you one of my favorite techniques for using spray paint to make your frame look high-end. So there's a lot of spray paints out there that give you a faux metal finish, but this one is the absolute best to give you that chrome or stainless steel look. I've tried the other faux chrome ones on the market, and this is the best one. It actually provides a little bit of a reflection so it looks real, and it's a really heavy spray paint, so you don't entirely need to put on a primer. But I do suggest doing about 2 to 3 coats and letting it dry for at least 48 hours before you use it. And then later in this video, I'll show you a really cool art piece that I'm going to put in here to finalize this frame. I also have this old clipboard looking frame that looks kind of shabby chic farmhouse, and this was gifted to me with a picture of my friend and myself on it, and I thought it was super cute, but the style is just not it for me. However, I really liked the clipboard aspect because I thought that was such a unique way to display a photo or a piece of art that wasn't just a traditional frame. So I wanted to do a really cheap and easy update instead of just slapping a coat of paint on it. So I just unscrewed the little clip piece and then cut out a piece of this really cool burlwood contact paper. I think it looks really realistic because burlwood usually has a glossy finish to it, and it gives it a really cool vibe that matches my home so much more. And I'm really not being precious with how I fold the contact paper onto the frame. It's up to you if you want to be really meticulous, but you'll see at the end it doesn't exactly matter. And then I just taped down the little stand in the back because I do want to hang this on the wall. So I'm putting the little screw back on so that the clip will be on top again, and then I'm going to add a wall hanger on the back because it doesn't have one at the moment. So you can buy these like at Home Depot or somewhere for a couple bucks, and it just comes with these little pin nails, and I just hammered it in with my little mini hammer, and that was pretty much it. I put this little Polaroid on here and I thought that looked really cute. I also put a picture of myself and my grandma from when I was like 2 years old listening to a cassette tape or something, and I love the way it turned out. So I picked up this frame from IKEA many years ago, and it's got this really interesting insert that kind of gives a shadow box feel, but the wood is kind of like a faux birch finish. I think it's actually just made out of MDF, and I have a really interesting piece of art that I want to put in here. So I want the frame color to really highlight the art while also fitting into our house a little bit more. So I found a color of spray paint that's really going to accentuate the colors in the piece of art. But before I get to that, I want to cover this in a layer of primer. This Zinsser spray primer is amazing. It dries really quick. MDF covered in a faux finish doesn't have any natural pores to help the paint stick, so the Zinsser primer is an essential step. And the color that I chose is a satin finish of nutmeg. I think it's a really nice elevated looking brown, and you'll see once I get to the art portion of this how much different it makes the art look. But before we get to that, I did break the glass in our move, so I found a glass cutter who would give me a new piece for only $5, as I wasn't able to find a piece of glass for this at the thrift store. I love the muted brown color on here. It feels really elevated, and it's definitely such an upgrade from that basic IKEA look. Again, I will show you the piece of art that I chose for this frame and how I end up matting it in the latter half of this video. But for now, let's move on to the next category of framing, which is creating your own. So I I've pinned a lot of really interesting photos on Pinterest that feature a more unconventional way to mount art, and I think the only way to emulate this look is to make something myself. So I've had this little wood panel in my collection. I think it's from the Dollar Tree, and it's the perfect size for like a little mini frame, but it's made out of real wood. So I wanted to obviously stain it, and I chose a really good color. It's Golden Oak by Varathane. It kind of gives that mid-tone plywood look. And even if you don't have a piece of wood like this, you can find a lot of these types of craft pieces of wood at places like the Dollar Tree and Michael's, but if you wanted to make this yourself, you could just pick up a scrap piece of plywood that's 1/4 or a 1/2 inch thick and then cut it down to your desired size. I think mine is 5 by 7. And then I would just pick up a square dowel that's about 1/2 inch in diameter, or you can even go to the gardening section and pick up a wooden stake that's about the same size, and then cut it down into 4 pieces to create a frame around your piece of plywood. Use some wood glue to attach it, and you would have exactly the same frame as I do. So once that dried, I just brought it inside and found an old picture of my great-grandparents, because I think the juxtaposition of an old picture with just the simple modern vibe of this frame is a really interesting look. And I just used some linen tape that I folded into little bundles on the back to hold it there. And linen tape is great because it's acid-free, so it's not going to ruin the photo. If I wanted, I could screw in my own little clip on this as well, or I could flip it over and use the other side so that the little dowels around the edges kind of give it that traditional frame look. You could also add a hanger on the back. The options are kind of endless. Because it's so minimal and it's made out of natural material, I think it's the perfect frame to just get creative while keeping it minimal. And honestly, depending on the wood, the stain, the size, you can adapt this frame for any style of home. So another option here is to create a traditional frame yourself. And if you're maybe not comfortable mitering pieces of wood together, these build your own frame kits are great. I found this one specifically at a thrift store for like $4 for both of these pieces. It's a 16 by 20 size, and it's made out of solid wood, and it comes with these plastic dovetail connector pieces. You can find these build your own frame kits at any kind of art supply store like Michael's or Blick. I would suggest getting them in a raw material, as this one specifically I didn't know until I opened it, or sealant on it has some kind of glaze or stain. And I think we know by now that this color of wood is just not my style. So instead of me sitting here trying to sand down in between each one of these little grooves on the frame to then stain it to a color that I really want, I'm of course going to paint it. But instead of just doing a solid color, there's 2 options here that I wanted to highlight. One is that I could spray paint it about 5 or 10 times, sanding in between with a high gloss paint to give it that really interesting lacquered look, which could be really fun and interesting. Or I could just give this frame 1 coat of paint in 1 color and then use a piece of painter's tape and create a checkerboard pattern and use the painter's tape as the spacer so that the checkerboard is even all around. And by doing the base level of paint, it helps eliminate the bleeding of the 2 colors. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like to know how to create a wood frame from scratch using trim and a miter saw from the hardware store. There's a few different ways to go about it, and there's a ton of tips and tricks and tools you can use. So maybe I can do that in a later video if you guys are interested. But moving this video along, we're jumping into alternative framing options, and this is the final framing section before we get into matting. I've already kind of covered this a little bit by showing you the clipboard option as well as the little DIY 5 by 7 wood frame, but there's just a few more ideas I wanted to show you to get you thinking outside of the proverbial frame box. So let's get into it. Okay, so first I just want to start with the simplest option. You can use magnetic frames if you want to do something a little bit more alternative, or you have a lot of posters. These pieces of wood just have little magnets inside and they connect to each other. And if you put a piece of art in between them, it holds it really securely. And you can get these in so many different sizes. This was my very first foray into putting art on my walls. I bought these forever ago and I thought they were great for some of the cool posters that I had. And they're so easy to hang. All you need is like a little command hook or a framing nail, something super simple and minimal. And something like this works really great for a more minimal look or maybe even a more cottagey feel. And then, as I mentioned previously, you can mount pieces of art in the middle of blocks of wood, or you could find a little random odd-shaped piece of wood. I also found this like interesting long vertical door hanger looking piece of art that was probably made out of a piece of matting or also a piece of wood. So try to think about the different shapes and sizes to make something look unique and interesting while also complementing the piece of art. I also used this frame as inspiration to make my own version of it with a bunch of blocks that I found from the thrift store. I also thought this frame looked like it was made from one of those old Chinese checkerboards. And I thought, what an interesting idea to use that board as the basis for a frame. Hopefully this helps you see that you can use literally just about anything for framing as long as it's highlighting the art as well as making a statement in your home. So now that you have plenty of places to start when it comes to framing, we're gonna get into matting. I'm gonna start with some of the simplest and easiest affordable ideas that still have an impact, and then eventually show you some of the more complicated ways to cut matting. But all in all of these tips and ideas are absolutely essential to giving you the most information so that you know exactly what to do when you encounter a really cool piece of art. I'm gonna mention this one little tip to begin with, just in case it didn't cross some people's minds. You can always pick up a secondhand frame that already has matting in it and just swap out the art with the piece that you have. However, let's say your frame is perfect and the matting inside is the perfect size to display the art that you wanna put in there, but the matting is just not the right color. Let's go back to my square IKEA frame to show you what I would do. So this brown frame ended up looking like this when we were done painting it and putting in the brand new piece of glass. And just as a reminder, this is originally what the frame looked like with no glass. It already had a photograph that Dalton took that I want to keep in here and a mat that came with the frame, but the matting was pretty scuffed up because it didn't have a piece of glass in it for quite a while. And you can see that the white mat is quite stark. And instead of having to buy a new mat and learning how to cut it, which I will show you how to do very soon, you can just take some spray paint and change the color of an existing mat. This is so affordable considering spray paint is about $6 and it takes about 15 minutes to an hour to dry. So then all I had to do was put it back together and tape down the back leg so that I could hang it on the wall. And I think you can really see here that the frame and the matte color make the photograph pop just a little bit more. And I probably could have spray painted the little shadow box insert thing the same color as the matte, but I think it looks great nevertheless. So sometimes with these old vintage frames, they already have a built-in linen looking mat, so you don't have to create one yourself. So I wanted to show you how I put this old ripped canvas in the first frame that we restored. It's a painting from the 20s of Coronado here in San Diego, and I thought the blue and brown on the frame would look amazing with this piece. So I of course cleaned this frame up, and then I measured the inside of the frame and the size of the art, and I'm taking one of these thin canvas panels. This one I think is a 12 by 16, which is not entirely the right size for this art or frame, but I'm going to be focusing on just fitting in the actual visual of the painting. And then I'm going to fold the signature underneath just because I want to keep the integrity of the artist's name considering how old this is, but I want to focus on how pretty the art is as well. You could technically cut down one of these canvas panel boards with an X-Acto knife to the exact size you want if you didn't mind sacrificing the art and making it also the same size of the canvas panel that would fit inside the groove of the frame. But I'm just going to place this canvas on the back of the frame and you'll see how great it looks at the end. So I'm covering this entire thing with a layer of Mod Podge, just using a really cheap chip brush from the hardware store. And then I'm gonna let it dry and get just a little bit tacky and center the oil painting on top of it. It's not going to want to immediately stick, so I'm just gonna lay some heavy books on it and let it dry. And once it's dry, I can flip the canvas over and I'm going to paste on the ripped pieces on the backside and let that dry too. Lastly, I just used some acid-free masking tape to attach it to the back of the frame, and this stuff is really sticky and won't damage any art or frames. And I think this finished look is so good. It really maintains that antique quality. We get to see the majority of the artwork. The frame looks refreshed and yet still has that nice patina to it, and I absolutely love it. So if you're not familiar with matting, this is the easiest way to get kind of that professional curated look with a piece of art. So I have this cute little block print I picked up at a local artist market a while ago, and it's kind of small and I really liked the ripped edges of it just because I think it adds more of an artist look to this piece. So I picked up this pack of 8x10 mats. You can get these at an art store like Blick, or I got mine on Amazon. It comes with a bunch of different colors. They're really thick and easy to use. And when I don't know what kind of mat color I want to use, I just kind of play around with it and put the frame on top and the art on top, because you always want your frame and matting to complement the art and vice versa. So I'm just using the glass as a guide to cut out the size of mat that I'll need. I use 2 straight corners just to make sure that 2 sides are square, because when you're cutting by hand with just a ruler as your guide, it's really hard to get a really straight cut. So this just ensures that I have 2 straight sides that'll fit snugly inside the frame. But fortunately, you won't see this in most frames, as there has to be a little lip inside the frame to hold the mat, so I wouldn't totally worry about it. And because this frame has a piece of of glass. I think a really fun creative way to mount your art where you don't have to cut out a beveled inner opening is to just use an aesthetically pleasing piece of washi tape. It's acid free so it won't ruin the art, and it adds a little something extra to the piece. And then one of my favorite framing tools is this point driver. You just lay it on top of the backing like so and pull on the trigger, and it inserts one of those bendable staples so that you can take the art in and out and it'll keep everything in place. This is so much cleaner than using tape to hold everything in, and a lot of older frames don't have a piece of backing to lock in your art. And then because this frame came with a vertical hanger and I'm using this horizontally, I'm just adding a little D-ring on here and that just finishes it up. So we're going to use our faux chrome frame to create a faux double matte. So I picked up this greeting card that had a really nice white border around it. But if you found a piece of art that didn't have a white border on it, you could cut the art out exactly around the edges and place it on a white card. You just want to make sure that you're going to be able to see the second matte. So I'm going to cut down this white border just a little bit more so we can see this red one behind it, as I think the layering of the different shades of red is kind of interesting with the chrome. And then I'll use the backing of this frame to cut out my red matte. And then I'm obsessed with this little tape runner thing. It has double-sided tape in it, and you just have to click it open and then slide it down your piece of artwork, and it has a little thing in there to cut the piece of tape so you don't have to get double-sided tape all over your hands. I don't really worry about using acid-free tape with something like a greeting card, so this is a great solution to keep it really flat. This is the easiest way to do a faux custom matting job, and I think it looks just as good as the real thing. So I wanted to frame this. This is by the same artist who did that little curled up cat that we did with washi tape. And I cut this mat out of the backing that was in the frame that just stated what size it was on. So it's kind of like magazine texture. And I'm using this peel and stick velvet. I use this as a drawer liner in my dresser. And I had some left over and I wanted to emulate that velvet matting look on some of those vintage frames. So I just did a rough cut of the velvet and stuck the little paper mat cutout to it. You could do this with something a little bit more sturdy like cardboard, but I had this paper handy and it worked out just fine. Next, I just took my X-Acto knife and made an X in the middle. It looks really messy just because I was doing this quickly, and you'll see that it looks actually really good in the end, so you don't have to be a perfectionist with this at all. And I just folded over the little excess edges, and then that was literally it. I placed it in the frame and took some linen tape and taped the art to the matting. And you could also do this with fabric like linen, or you could get another type of peel and stick material. Literally any kind of texture makes matting really interesting. Also, I could probably put a piece of glass on the front of this if I wanted to, but for now I kind of like it without the glass. And finally, before we jump into custom matting, I wanted to show you that you could pick up some art and matting from different frames at different thrift stores and put them together to create your own custom matting job. So I found these two pieces of art that were similar in size with similar sized cutouts for matting, and I just wanted to stack them up and make them kind of interesting. So I'm just using the frame's backing as a guide for size and then making a pencil mark and cutting on top of a foam board. And I just have to score these multiple times until they break off. So now the width and the length of all of the random mats will be the same size as the frame and they'll fit in seamlessly. And then I'm just using that double-sided tape dispenser to connect everything together and putting it back in the frame, and then using a point driver to keep it in place. Then adding a D-hook on the back of the frame so that I can hang it on the wall in the right orientation. And that's it. Okay, so now that you have a couple ideas on how to fake matting or repurpose it, or even just create a matted look without having to cut one, let's get into the cutting portion. We're gonna start with the most basic center bevel cut on a small 5x7 frame, and then we're gonna work our way into some more complicated cuts. So let's get into it. So the reason that we really like matting that looks like this is because instead of just taking an X-Acto knife and cutting a hole in a piece of cardboard, these mats have been cut at a bevel, which creates that nice little white highlight inside the color, and it looks really clean and crisp. So that's what we're gonna do here, is create some simple center bevel cuts. So I'm finally ready to put some art in here. I have this other frame that I'm not using at the moment, and I'm just gonna take out the glass because it's exactly the same size as this frame, and I don't usually see glass on frames like this, and I thought it might be kind kind of interesting to do something a little bit different. So I'm going to be using this photograph that I took on my film camera many years ago at the Del Mar racetrack because I used to be a horse girl and I want some horse vibes in my home. And I think it's kind of an interesting look and it really matches this frame. And as you can see, it's just a little bit smaller than the frame opening. So I think it would look great with a center bevel cut mat. This is the most standard, simplest cut you can do for a mat. So I'm just going to grab my little pile of different colored mats from Amazon. And I've chosen this one because I think it just complements the photo and the frame really well. So I'm just going to cut out this piece of matting and make sure that it fits and looks good in the frame. And to create that bevel cut, so there's that white highlight inside the colored mat, you need to cut it from the opposite side. So we always want to cut on the white side. So this mat size is about 5x7 and my photo is about 4x6. So I'm just going to trace my photo onto the mat and then I'm going to cut in about 1/4 to 1/2 inch because that's how much is going to overhang over my photo so that it looks really nice behind the matting. And now we move on to using this Logan bevel mat cutter 4000. It's actually really handy. It's got this little notch on here. So in order to get that white highlight bevel cut in the center, you always want to use the bevel cutter on the inside of your inner margin while keeping the ruler on the outside of that 1/2 inch margin line. You just align this little notch on the cutter with the inner margin line. And then once you've got it all lined up, you press down on this black thing and it sticks just about 1/2 inch of a razor out, which is why I'm cutting on a foam board on top of a cutting mat, just so that I don't go through the table. So you do this on each side. You align the notch to your inner line margin. You slowly drag down as you're pressing on this little black button. It releases the angled razor blade, which creates a beveled cut on the other side. And on your last cut, the middle will just pop out. And then you'll have that really nice beveled look on the inside versus just cutting a straight hole in the middle with an X-Acto knife. It won't have that refined look. You can absolutely do it, but it'll be very difficult. And this tool makes it really easy and makes it look super nice. And I think it's about $50 or so. So I guess you could say it's an investment, but if you're going to be framing a lot of art for your home, I think it's worth it. The final step here is to just put some linen hanging tape on the picture and the mat so that they stay in place. And then because this frame did not come with backing, of course, because it's vintage, I just have a scrap piece of cardboard that I'm going to cut and put it on the back. And then I'll seal it in with this little point driver gun. And then that's it. I think it looks really awesome and it's kind of different. And I love displaying an old photograph of mine. Okay, so we're taking everything we've learned and putting it into this orange frame. So I'm measuring the inside of the frame and then I went to Blick, which is a big art store, and I bought 2 big pieces of matting. These are about $15 to $22 each, depending on what kind you get. And then I got this piece of art with 2 others as like a triptych at the Long Beach flea market years ago for like maybe $5. And I've always wanted to frame it in a really interesting way. And because this image is like a photograph kind of on a canvas board, and it's got kind of like this purpley sepia type tone to it, even though it predominantly reads as black and white. I think this blackish brown and this burgundy is going to look so good with the photograph, especially contrasted by like the really white creamy linen and like the bright orange. I think a huge part about framing is understanding color theory and balance and focal point, and it's really just a creative process. So the only way to get better at it is to just continue to do it as much as possible. So right here, I'm just deciding which mat I want to be more dominant, as I want the mat to be off center, and I'm also going to layer these 2. So I'm just triple checking that the photograph is centered in the middle of this mat, and I have the exact measurements because when you're working with a larger board, it can be a little bit more expensive because this is kind of your one shot at making it look good before you have to buy an entire new board. A huge tip here is when you're working with larger mat boards is to use one of these T-squares or a speed square because it can be difficult to cut a really straight line with a really long ruler. However, as you see here, I'm taking it really slow, and because I feel like I can't keep the ruler straight, I just pause in the middle, move my hand, and press it down really hard to keep the ruler as straight as possible. As you can imagine, once you master this and figure it out, you can really do any kind of matting job that you want, whether it's super obscure and really small or something off center or having multiple openings on one mat. It's really up to your creativity here. On this one specifically, I think I want the burgundy to be the accent and the brown to be the more dominant color. The burgundy one is the same situation we had with the horse art where it's just overlapping the art by maybe 1/4 or 1/2 inch. But because we're including a second mat in here for another color, we want that second second mat opening to be larger, not smaller, so that we can expose the burgundy trim and the artwork. So we're actually going to push our border outward. And I think I'm going about an inch outward. And that's why I'm drawing these little arrows, just to remind myself that I'm actually going to be cutting a larger hole in this one. I'm also adding an X where I'm going to be cutting and reminding myself of where's burgundy and where's brown and where the center is, just to keep reminding myself so I don't ruin it, because I don't want to have to buy another mat. Every time I do a project, Olive has to walk on it. But now that we have both of these cut out, I can see that they're not 100% perfect. I definitely have a little nick up on top of the brown one, but it's okay because it's gonna look fine, and I did it myself and it costs a lot less than getting it done professionally. So I'm just gonna use some of that linen tape and do a more professional attachment. Typically you try to not put a lot of it on the artwork and then double tape it in a cross format. You don't have to do that, but I just wanted to show you this is like the quote unquote professional way to go about it. And then I just used my point driver to keep everything in place. And I think it turned out so good. I'm really obsessed with this, and it's like one of my favorite pieces now. Cool piece of art I got from the Long Beach fleet as well. It's from the 60s, and I wanted to try out a monochromatic look. A lot of really cool matting jobs do a monochromatic vibe with the art, the frame, and the matting. So I have this old frame that I found in the garage. I just cleaned it up and covered up the hanger so that it doesn't get spray paint on it. And then I use this glossy Rust-Oleum navy blue because I think that just brings out a lot of the colors in the art. And because of that, I chose a dark navy matting as well. I just made sure to spray this a few times to get that really saturated glossy blue color. I'm now showing you the most expensive matting tool so far. This is the Logan Compact Classic Mat Cutter. It's basically a metal guide that you can slide your bevel cutter down to keep the cut straight. It comes with razors, a bevel cutter, as well as just an additional mat cutter, which is basically an X-Acto knife. And it comes with this guiding ruler so that you can get perfect borders on every side. So the first step here is to just measure out my mat and my art. And based on the size of my frame and the art, it's looking like I might need about 4¼ inches on the left and the right side of the art, and about 4¾ on the top and bottom, so that it just overlays the art just a bit and is center in the frame. So you just have to set the scale of the border that you want here. So I'm going to put mine at 4¼ and tighten this guide block. And then you can see when I slide in my matting and I make a little pencil mark, when I pull it out, it does measure out to being 4¼ inches. So I know that when I make my cut, it's going to be the exact measurement that I need. So as you can see, this just eliminates 99.9% of human error because you're using a set ruler system that's really, really accurate. So first I'm just going to put my matting in the ruler and make pencil marks up and down so that I have crosshairs in every corner. Then I'm going to make sure that the left and right sides will have some overlap, but as you can see, 4¼ is not going to give me enough to overlap the top and the bottom of this artwork. And because the Logan Compact Cutter doesn't move all the way out to 5 inches, for example, because it's a smaller home mat cutter, I'm going to do a manual measurement of about 1/2 inch, double check my measurement with my art. Then we're going to put a slip sheet in this mat cutter. And first I'm going to cut up and down long ways to make sure to get my 4¼ cuts, as I know that those are very simple. Then we're going to move the scale setter all the way back, which will kind of take it off the track for a second until I can align that second 1/2 inch margin line with the mat cutter. And then I'm going to move that set scale block up against the piece of matting and lock it in place. So it's still assisting me even though it couldn't measure beyond like 4½ inches. It's keeping the mat in place, it's keeping my cut straight, and it's making this so easy. The fact that the bevel cutter just sits on the track and slides up and down seamlessly is so helpful. So I just wanted to take some time to show you how a more expensive tool actually could make your life a lot easier, and it's worth the investment if you're going to be framing a few pieces of art in your home throughout the years. I think it definitely pays for itself over time, and it makes matting just a little bit less daunting and more exciting. Mainly, this video is designed to be bookmarked so that you can come back time and time again and get the answers or the inspiration that you might need to create custom art for your home. And if you just don't have any cool art to frame, then definitely check out this video where I talk about tons of alternative art ideas that are really affordable and easy to do. And then in each one of my room makeovers, I always try to add some interesting and affordable art. So definitely go check those out as well. Other than that, I will see you guys on the next one. Bye, guys.